The Guided Goals podcast gives you the tools, direction, and resources you need to pursue your passion project. I'm Deborah Eckerling, Project Catalyst, and this is the Guided Goals podcast. Our guest today is Marci Baun, and we're going to talk about self-publishing. Marci is the founder and CEO of Wild Child Publishing and Freya's Bauer. Welcome, Marci. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Deborah.
Would you like to share a little bit more about yourself and your background, and then we'll jump right on in?
Sure. I have been in the publishing industry for 15 years, and besides having two publishing houses, I also help people self-publish.
Which is exactly why when I wanted to cover this topic, I'm like, ooh, Marci, okay, let's chat. Uh, why are more why are more people self-publishing these days? Let's start with that, and then we can go into the nuts and bolts of what people need to do if they decide to go that route.
Well, in part, it's because you have more control over your publishing. You can set your price. You can decide where you want it to be as far as which distributors within reason, and you don't have to wait for an agent to decide whether or not they think what you're doing is valuable and whether they want to sign you. And then you don't have to wait for the agent to send it to a publisher who then decides whether or not they want to publish you. So there are so many people who have so much to share, and it's much easier for them to go ahead and get it done and get it out there than to wait for could be 10 years before someone actually decides that, hey, we love what you have.
In this instant society, 10 years sounds like an eternity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've known people who it took them 20 years to get an agent.
Wow. And so much has changed, and I wholeheartedly admit this because I have my other website and community for writers right on online. Is I used to be so, when self-publishing first got, I guess, popular, I was so against it because it was vanity publishing, right? People were saying, not even putting an effort into it. They were just saying, I want my book out. There, my book's out. Done.
Well, I think there is still a contingency of people who say, for instance, I had an author call me and I spoke to him briefly about a submission to one of my houses, and I told him quite bluntly, what you have is not long enough for a publisher for that market to consider even touching, because it's just not long enough. But if you're going to self-publish, you need to hire a professional editor. You need to hire a professional cover artist. And this is what I would encourage you to do, because not that your books aren't worth being published, but for that market, most publishers are not going to touch it. So I actually encouraged her to self-publish because I knew that it just wasn't going to work for most publishers. But then she turned around and said to me, "Oh, I don't need anybody to edit it. I'm really good at English."
Oh my God.
And I said, no, no, no. Now let me say it. And I tried to be nice about it, but I said, I'm a publisher. I'm an editor. I do this professionally. And I have friends, a number of friends who are publishers who are also authors, and I am an author myself. And I would never, ever let anything out there without someone else editing it, because you're too close to it and you can't see your own mistakes. And they're also going to see things that you skipped over because it's already in your head.
Right.
And you understand it, but someone else may not. Or you might think that this makes sense as far as how it goes from one point to the next point to the next point. And the editor might say, that doesn't really make sense. This is what you need here, switch this around here. And then when you go to read it, you're like, oh yeah, but you couldn't see it because you were too close to it.
Yeah. And that goes back to, so people are taking it more seriously, which is why the quality of self-published books, and it should be high quality, because if someone is putting their work out there, they're doing it for a reason, to get noticed, to sell, and no one's gonna buy crap, right?
Well, people were in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
People were like, "Ooh, free books or 99-cent books." And then they started downloading them. And I don't know how many readers I had come to me tell me, you know, after three or four that were so poorly edited, and it was obvious that somebody just slapped it up there, uh, free wasn't even enough of an enticement for me to even consider to download it. So, you want to make sure you follow the steps of what would be the traditional publishing, as far as making sure that it's edited, that you have someone else proofread it, because editors are human, and they'll miss things. They'll get a lot, but they're still going to miss things. So you want to make sure that you have someone else coming along and proofreading it as well, because that second or third set of eyes, boy, does that help.
Before we go into the ins and outs of how one would actually self-publish, do you have any tips for people looking to write a book?
The first thing I would say is that you need to decide what you want to focus on. Why are you writing this book? And second, who is your audience? Because if you don't know what you're going to write the book about, you're going to spin your wheels and you're going to jump from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, and it's going to be completely incoherent. And so you might have a bunch of really great chapters, but there'll be no common thread that will link them together. So focus on what it is that you want to impart, whatever it may be, whether you want to inspire someone, whether you are really wanting to tell your story, but also help someone get through maybe something similar that happened to you. Whether there's just so many, or you want to show someone how to set up a business. Do you get what I'm saying? Or maybe it's about helping someone with their health, as far as their with back problems or something like that. You really need to focus on that. Then you also need to decide who is your audience, and don't hit broad. You want to narrow that down, because what is going to be important to one section of the population is not going to be important for another section of the population. Knowing what you're going to write and with what you're going to focus on, but you have to couple that with who your audience is. Otherwise, it's going to be a crapshoot, and you will be splattered all over the wall. That you don't want that. And thinking, well, I don't want to limit my audience. You do better to limit your audience, and then expand it as you go on. If you're wanting to write a book that is in line with someone, say, like Deepak Chopra, then you need to find out who is that audience. You start with yourself, because obviously, if you know who he is and you've read his books, or you've read his books, or you read Napoleon Hill or something, these types of people, these types of authors, I should say, or those that are published by a company like that, a publishing house like that, then you start with you, because you are part of the audience. So what's your demographic? What do you like? How old are you? What is your income? All of those things to think about, and then you start building it. It's not to say that you don't just sit down and write, because at some point you have to sit down, and you also, I would say, if you're really serious about writing it, then you need to set a certain amount of time, either daily or weekly or twice weekly, and that becomes your sacred writing time. And it doesn't matter what you write, as long as you're writing something on the book and you're getting words onto the screen and onto the page.
Is there a page or a word length for nonfiction books that's a gauge, or do people just write until they're done?
I would say at least 50,000, but the average novel is about 70,000 words. But again, it depends on your topic.
Mm-hmm.
and how you're writing it. And then I would say also don't pad it, because people will know when you're padding it. If there's a story that is pertinent to it and it helps bolster the point you're trying to make, then include it. But including 10 different stories to bolster your point, you're going to lose your audience.
If someone's e-publishing, I think length matters a little bit less.
That's true. If you're going to e-publish, um, there was a point there where the word count was about 30,000, and those were very popular because people could 15 to 30,000, because people could download them and read them almost within like a lunch break
Mm-hmm.
or on their ride home on the subway. You can make it shorter. You can also do tips books. That's a very popular thing for people to do if you are in the process of writing that larger book that you intend on having. You can also do a tips book and do like 50 tips. And so then you start establishing, hey, I have something to say here. These are all cool and important to, again, to the audience that you're going to be directing either your book, and also maybe if you're a speaker, to the audience of what you're going to be speaking about.
So someone's written a book, they've had it professionally edited, they've hired out for a cover designer, and if they're doing a physical book, someone to design the actual book, right? You want a book to promote your expertise, and then you
Mm-hmm.
just want to get it out to the universe. What is the step after you have either your virtual or physical book?
Well, you're going to want to get it onto the distributors. And if you can hire people who can help you do that, there's different distributors. I say, yes, there's Amazon, and you could use CreateSpace, which is a printer. And if it's really, Amazon owns CreateSpace. So from CreateSpace, it'll automatically go up onto Amazon once you've published it. It'll take a few days, like maybe a week. So a lot of times it's shorter than that. But then you have your print book up there. You're going to want to use the Kindle Direct program. That's Amazon's ebook program. So if you're going to, I say that if you're going to do print, you might as well do the ebook too, because there's going to be people who want the ebook and may not want print, or there will be people who will want just the print. Or there are people who just want the ebook. So make it available as much as possible as far as the formats that you have. Then I would look at making it available on iTunes, and they have a self-publishing program. You can make it available through Barnes & Noble, through their Nook Pubit. There's also Kobo that you can make it available. And you can also do Smashwords if you want to. And Smashwords will distribute out to a lot of different distributors. And I would say that's kind of what I would focus on. So if you're not worried about getting into Barnes & Noble, CreateSpace is an easy way to go. If you want to get it into Barnes & Noble, then you're probably going to want to use Ingram Spark, which is connected to Ingram, which is a huge distributor that distributes to Barnes & Noble. It distributes to the independent booksellers. It distributes to libraries will buy through there. So those are different. I mean, those are the main distributors to be looking at. I would say be careful of trying to set up with Baker and Taylor, which is, they're also a distributor, but you have to have printed X amount of books, and then they hold them and they sell them for you, and you have to give them it's a 55% discount. Or maybe
Wow.
it's 65 or
It sounds
something
like
like
it's
that.
high.
And so it's very high. And that would be something where you would have to do an offset run. So you're probably looking at printing 500 to 1,000 books. And it just doesn't make sense to do that anymore.
Okay, and so Ingram Spark is better?
Well, Baker and Taylor is not actually a printer.
Okay.
It's just a distributor. So you'd have to be able to, you'd apply for an account with them, and then they'd have to say, okay, we're going to let you distribute through us. A lot of the libraries do really use Baker and Taylor, but there are a lot of hassles that go along with it. So if what you're looking for is to establish your expertise and you're not worried about the libraries, then I would, like I said, use CreateSpace or Ingram Spark, or you could do both CreateSpace and Ingram Spark. But you're going to need someone who knows what they're doing when it comes to formatting for Ingram Spark, because it's not as simple as CreateSpace.
Anything else that if someone is looking to self-publish needs to know before they jump in?
Well, if you're doing nonfiction, even for fiction, but for nonfiction, before you even publish it, or you want to have your website set up, you want to make sure that you're building a list. All of this probably sounds familiar, so that you can let people know when your book is coming out, where to find you.
I think the key thing, and you probably alluded to it earlier, is you have to treat it as if you're actually traditionally publishing, right?
Yes. Yeah, if you want people to take you seriously, then you need to treat it like it's a that you are a professional, and you need to approach it like a professional. There's such a huge amount of books being released that you have that one chance to get people to notice you. And if you do it in a way, you want to be memorable, but you want it to be a good memorable. The average book sells less than 100 copies, regardless of how it's published. Whether it's published by New York publishers, an independent publisher, or by a self publisher. So, how you get noticed is by building your list, knowing your audience and what they want, and then reaching that audience. And it's, sometimes you try one thing and it doesn't work, you have to try something else. But what I would say is that if you're going to try one thing, stick with that for a while before you try something else. Because in average, it takes people to see something 12 times before they even remember it. And that's why, when you see all those commercials that repeat and repeat and repeat, it's because of that.
Good to know. Okay, before we wrap, I like to ask the work-life balance question. So, what do you do to make sure you have balance in your life?
Well, I swim. That helps me a great deal. And after a certain time of day, unless I have some crunch on, the computer is off. So 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, I shut everything down, and I'm no longer doing anything towards work. And I found in the beginning, I used to work like 80 hours a week, 60 to 80 hours a week. And after about 6 or 7 years, I got burnt out. So I realized that if I wanted to continue doing this, I had to set boundaries, not just for other people, but for myself.
That's really important, and I think that is a great transition into the personal goal of the week, which is to set a cutoff time. Try it for a week to set an earlier cutoff time than you normally would do, and see how it works to help your productivity the rest of the day. I think that's a good personal goal, and if it works, keep doing it, and if it doesn't, play with the times until you come up with one that does work for you. And I think for the professional goal, if you are thinking about writing a book, you need to sit down and figure out what are you writing and who you are writing it for. Just brainstorm it out. And if you're in the process of the book, maybe take a step back and make sure you know who you are writing it for and what you are writing. Take an inventory of it. What do you think?
I agree completely. I helped someone change her title of her book. We just changed the title of her book, and she was reinvigorated, and she rewrote her entire book, and she said it's so much better now because I have a focus of what it's for and what it's about.
So there you have it. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today. We've been speaking with Marci Baun and about self-publishing, but if you've listened, you knew that. But thank you so much for joining us. And listeners, you can go to guidetogoals.com and you can watch the video or listen to the audio podcast and or read the show notes to learn a little bit more about self-publishing. And you've got your goals. There's no reason someone can't write a book and get it out there if they have the desire.